My mother told the ER doctor I was faking my seizure for attention while I was unconscious on the floor. The metallic taste hit my tongue first, copper and electricity. My vision tunneled into a pinpoint of light while Mrs. Garrison's voice echoed from somewhere far away, asking me to solve the equation on the board. I tried to tell her something was wrong, tried to form words, but my jaw locked and my body went rigid, and the last thing I remember before the world disappeared was the sound of my desk crashing sideways as I hit the linoleum. When awareness came back, I was staring at ceiling tiles with a crowd of faces hovering above me. Someone had turned me on my side. There was wetness on my chin. Mrs. Garrison was on her phone with 911, and my classmate Derek was telling everyone to back up and give me space. My tongue felt thick and wrong in my mouth. Everything hurt. The ambulance took 20 minutes to arrive. I spent that time lying on the classroom floor with a jacket under my head, drifting in and out of consciousness while Mrs. Garrison kept saying my name. Liam. Liam, can you hear me? The paramedics asked me questions I couldn't answer because my brain felt wrapped in cotton. They loaded me onto a stretcher and I saw the other students watching through the classroom windows as they wheeled me down the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright and made my head pound. One paramedic kept checking my pupils with a flashlight. The other one asked if I'd taken any drugs or if I had a history of seizures. I managed to shake my head no to both questions. They strapped an oxygen mask over my face and the ambulance started moving. My mother met us at the hospital. I was in a curtained bay in the emergency room when she arrived, still wearing her work scrubs from the dental office where she worked as a hygienist. Her first words weren't asking if I was okay. They were sharp and accusatory. What did you do? Her eyes scanned the monitors and IV line like she was looking for evidence of my guilt. The ER doctor introduced herself as Dr. Patel and started explaining what had happened at school. Grand mal seizure, loss of consciousness, possible head trauma from the fall. They needed to run tests, CT scan, blood work, EEG monitoring. My mother crossed her arms, and her expression went cold in that way I knew too well. The way that meant she'd already decided the narrative before hearing any facts. She told Dr. Patel I was faking it. Said it loud enough that the nurse adjusting my IV flinched. My son has always been dramatic. He does things like this when he wants attention or wants to get out of school. Her voice carried that syrupy tone she used when talking to authority figures, the one that made her sound reasonable and concerned instead of cruel. Dr. Patel looked between us with a carefully neutral expression. She explained that you can't fake a witnessed grand mal seizure, that the school had documentation, that my vital signs and physical presentation were consistent with a legitimate neurological event. My mother laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. Trust me, doctor. I know my son. This is exactly the kind of stunt he pulls. Dr. Patel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She said they'd be running the tests regardless and that I'd be admitted for observation. My mother said that was unnecessary and a waste of resources, that I just needed to go home and stop seeking attention. The doctor excused herself and left the bay. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see her talking to the charge nurse at the desk. Both of them kept glancing back toward us. My mother pulled out her phone and started texting, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't look at me once, didn't ask how I felt or if I was scared. Just sat in the plastic chair against the wall with her purse on her lap like she was waiting in a DMV instead of an emergency room where her son had just been brought in by ambulance after his first seizure. The tests took hours. They wheeled me to radiology for the CT scan, and I had to lie perfectly still while the machine whirred and clicked around my head. Back in the ER bay, a technician attached electrode pads to my scalp for the EEG monitoring. My mother complained about the wait time, about missing work, about how this was all unnecessary drama that could have been avoided if I'd just behaved normally at school. When Dr. Patel came back with preliminary results, she pulled the curtain closed for privacy. The CT scan showed no structural abnormalities, no tumors or bleeding, but my EEG readings were abnormal. There was unusual electrical activity in my temporal lobe. She used words like focal epilepsy and recommended I see a neurologist for further evaluation. My mother's response was immediate and dismissive. She told Dr. Patel that epilepsy didn't run in our family, that I was probably just dehydrated or hadn't eaten breakfast, that teenagers were always staying up too late on their phones and not taking care of themselves. Dr. Patel's professional mask slipped for just a second, and I saw frustration flash across her face. She explained that epilepsy could develop without family history, that the abnormal brain activity was documented and real, that ignoring it could be dangerous. My mother stood up and said we were leaving. Dr. Patel said I was being admitted overnight for monitoring and observation. My mother said she was refusing that treatment on my behalf. She was my legal guardian and she said no. The air in the bay went tense and still. Dr. Patel stepped outside again. This time she was gone longer. When she came back, there was a woman with her. Mid-50s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing business casual clothes with a hospital ID badge that said Linda Chen, Social Services. My stomach dropped because I knew what that meant. Someone had called in concerns. Linda introduced herself with a kind smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked if she could speak with me privately. My mother said, Absolutely not. That whatever needed to be discussed could be said in front of her. Linda's smile went even tighter. She explained that hospital policy allowed her to interview minors confidentially when there were concerns about their welfare. My mother's face flushed red. She demanded to know who had made a complaint and what they'd said. Linda didn't answer. She just asked my mother to step outside. The curtain closed behind my mother with a sharp snap of fabric. Linda pulled the plastic chair closer to my bed and sat down. Her voice went softer. She told me I wasn't in trouble, that the medical staff had concerns about my mother's response to my medical emergency, that refusing necessary treatment for a minor could constitute medical neglect. She asked me if this was a pattern, if my mother had dismissed or minimized my health concerns before. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell her about the time I broke my wrist, and my mother said I was being dramatic until the bone was literally sticking out at a wrong angle 3 days later. Wanted to explain about the migraines she said were just me trying to get out of chores. But Linda was a stranger, and my mother was right outside that curtain, and I'd have to go home with her eventually. So I said I didn't know, that maybe I was being dramatic. Linda wrote something in her notebook. She asked if I felt safe at home. The question hung in the air like smoke. I'd never been asked that before. Not by teachers who saw my mother's perfect PTA volunteer act. Not by coaches who thought she was supportive for coming to every game. Not by neighbors who watched her garden and thought she was a model single mother. The truth was complicated. My mother had never hit me, never screamed, never did anything that would leave marks someone could photograph. But she had a way of making me feel like every need I had was an imposition. Like being sick or hurt or struggling was a personal attack on her. Like I existed primarily to be low maintenance and convenient. I told Linda I felt safe. It wasn't exactly a lie. I was safe from physical harm. Just not from the slow erosion of being treated like a burden instead of a person. Linda left after making me promise to call her if I needed anything. She handed me a business card that I slipped under my pillow. Dr. Patel came back and told my mother that since she was refusing overnight admission, I'd be discharged with strict instructions. No driving, no being left alone for 48 hours, a neurology appointment within the week, a prescription for anti-seizure medication to start immediately. If I had another seizure, I needed to return to the ER right away. My mother signed the discharge papers without reading them. She grabbed her purse and told me to get dressed. The nurse gave me printed aftercare instructions and helped me into a wheelchair for the ride to the exit. Hospital policy. I wasn't allowed to walk out after a seizure. My mother walked 3 steps ahead the entire way to the parking lot. The car ride home was silent. My mother stared straight ahead at the road, with both hands gripping the steering wheel. I could feel her anger radiating off her like heat. We pulled into the driveway of our house, and she finally spoke. She said I'd embarrassed her, made her look like a bad mother in front of the hospital staff, made her miss work, and waste an entire day dealing with drama I'd created. I tried to explain that I didn't choose to have a seizure. She cut me off, said that epilepsy was convenient timing right before my chemistry test next week that I'd been complaining about. Said she wasn't stupid, and she knew when I was manipulating situations. I sat in the passenger seat with the discharge papers crumpled in my lap and felt something inside me crack. Not break, just crack, like the first fracture in ice before it shatters completely. She told me to go to my room and stay there for the rest of the day. No phone, no computer, no dinner, since I clearly wasn't that sick if I was capable of orchestrating elaborate medical episodes. I went upstairs and closed my door and sat on my bed in the clothes I'd worn to school. They smelled like floor cleaner and fierce sweat. My head still ached. My tongue had a bite mark on the side where my teeth had clamped down during the seizure. I pulled out Linda's business card from my pocket and stared at it. The card had a direct phone number and an email address. It had the words, Child Protective Services in small print at the bottom. I put it in my desk drawer under some old homework assignments and lay down. My phone buzzed from wherever my mother had confiscated it. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about having another seizure alone in my room with no one to help me. I woke up disoriented and nauseous. The room was dark. My alarm clock said 3 in the morning. I'd slept for almost 12 hours straight, probably because my brain was still recovering from the seizure. My mouth was dry as sand. I got up carefully and went downstairs to the kitchen for water. The house was quiet. My mother's bedroom door was closed. I filled a glass from the tap and drank it standing at the sink. That's when I saw the prescription bag on the counter. Dr. Patel had sent the anti-seizure medication to the pharmacy. My mother had picked it up but never given it to me. I opened the bag and read the label. Take 1 tablet twice daily with food. Start immediately. I took the first dose right there at the sink with tap water and a granola bar I found in the cabinet. School the next day was torture. Word had spread about my seizure and everyone treated me like I was made of glass or like I was a spectacle. Derek asked if I was okay and I said yes automatically. Mrs. Garrison pulled me aside before class and asked if I needed accommodations or extra time on assignments. I told her I was fine. During lunch, I sat alone at a table near the windows and tried to eat the sandwich my mother had thrown together that morning. Plain turkey on white bread, no condiments, like she couldn't be bothered to make it taste like anything. Across the cafeteria, I saw my girlfriend Maya watching me. We'd been together for 4 months and I hadn't texted her back since the seizure. She came over and sat down across from me. Maya asked what happened, why I hadn't responded to her messages, if I was mad at her. I told her about the seizure, about the hospital, about my mother refusing to believe it was real. Maya's expression shifted from confused to angry to horrified in the span of 10 seconds. She reached across the table and took my hand, asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, if there was something she could do. The concern in her voice made my throat tight. I told her I was managing. She didn't look convinced. She asked if my mom had at least made sure I was taking care of myself. I lied and said yes. Maya squeezed my hand and said if I needed to talk or needed a place to go, her door was always open. Her parents were the kind of people who actually cared about their kids, the kind who asked questions and listened to answers, the kind I'd always envied. The neurology appointment took 3 weeks to schedule. My mother complained about it the entire drive to the medical complex, about taking more time off work, about the copay, about how this was all a waste when there was clearly nothing wrong with me except an attention-seeking personality. The waiting room was full of people with real problems. A kid in a wheelchair, an elderly woman who couldn't stop trembling. I felt like a fraud sitting there with my normal appearance, and my mother's words echoing in my head. Maybe I was faking somehow. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. The nurse called my name and we followed her back to an exam room. Dr. Okafor was a tall Nigerian man with gentle eyes and a calm voice. He reviewed my ER records and EEG results on his computer, asked me detailed questions about what I remembered from the seizure, about any symptoms before or after. I told him about the metallic taste, the tunnel vision, the confusion afterward. He nodded like these were textbook symptoms. He did a neurological exam, had me follow his finger with my eyes, tested my reflexes with a small hammer, asked me to walk heel to toe across the room. Everything checked out normal. He pulled up my EEG results and showed us the abnormal wave patterns on his screen, explained that I had focal epilepsy originating in my temporal lobe, that it was a real neurological condition, that I needed to stay on medication and avoid triggers like sleep deprivation and stress. My mother asked if stress meant being a teenager who stayed up too late. Dr. Okafor said no. He meant traumatic stress, chronic anxiety, environmental factors that kept the nervous system in overdrive. He looked at my mother when he said it. She didn't like that. She told Dr. Okafor that I had a perfectly stable home environment, that I was just a sensitive kid who took everything too seriously. Dr. Okafor asked to speak with me privately. My mother refused, said she had every right to be present for her minor child's medical appointment. Dr. Okafor's expression went carefully blank. He said that was fine, but that he'd be documenting my case thoroughly and sending reports to my primary care physician and the school. He printed out information sheets about epilepsy and seizure safety, handed me a medical alert bracelet to wear, told me to keep a seizure diary, come back in 3 months for a follow-up EEG. He shook my hand and told me I was doing the right thing by taking my medication. His emphasis on that last part felt pointed, like he knew somehow that my mother had left it on the counter that first night. The second seizure happened 3 weeks later during gym class. We were running laps, and I felt that metallic taste again. I tried to tell the teacher, but the words wouldn't come. This time I stayed conscious through part of it. I felt my body jerking and thrashing on the gymnasium floor, felt the convulsions I couldn't control, heard the other students screaming, felt someone trying to hold me down and Coach Williams yelling at them to let me move. When it stopped, I lay there gasping with tears running down my face because I'd just proved my mother wrong in the most public way possible. The school nurse called an ambulance again, called my mother. I ended up back in the same ER bay with the same Dr. Patel looking at me with concern written all over her face. My mother arrived 40 minutes later. She walked in and immediately started talking before Dr. Patel could say anything. She told her I'd forgotten to take my medication this morning, that I'd been staying up late gaming, that I'd brought this on myself through irresponsibility. Dr. Patel asked me directly if that was true. I said no. I'd taken my medication every single day at the exact same times. I'd been going to bed at 10. I'd been following every instruction. My mother's face flushed. She said I was lying to make her look bad. Dr. Patel held up her hand. She said the school had provided detailed documentation, that this seizure had come out of nowhere during routine physical activity, that sometimes breakthrough seizures happened even with medication, that we needed to adjust my dosage. She said something else too, something that made my mother go very still. She said the ER staff had flagged my case for a pattern of concerning parental behavior during medical emergencies, that there were notes from my first visit about treatment refusal and dismissal of documented medical conditions, that if this continued, they'd be required to make a formal report to Child Protective Services. My mother's voice went ice cold. She said that was completely unnecessary and overstepping, that she was a healthcare professional herself and knew how to care for her child. Dr. Patel said being a dental hygienist didn't qualify her to override a neurologist's treatment plan. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My mother grabbed her purse and stood up. She told Dr. Patel we wouldn't be returning to this hospital, that she'd be finding me care elsewhere. Then she walked out. Dr. Patel looked at me for a long moment. She asked quietly if I wanted to go home with my mother. The question caught me off guard. I was 17, not quite an adult, but old enough to understand what she was really asking. if I felt safe, if I needed help, if this was the moment to speak up. I thought about Linda's business card still hidden in my desk drawer, about Maya's offer to help, about Coach Williams who'd witnessed the seizure and knew I hadn't faked it, about the pattern of documentation building in my medical records. I told Dr. Patel I wanted to call someone. She handed me her phone. I pulled Linda's number from my memory and dialed. She answered on the third ring. I told her I needed help. She said she was on her way. My mother came back to the bay 20 minutes later expecting to take me home. Instead, she found Linda sitting next to my bed with a folder full of documentation. Linda introduced herself again and explained that there was now sufficient evidence of medical neglect to warrant an immediate investigation, that I would be placed in emergency foster care while the investigation proceeded, that my mother could contest this through family court, but that for now, I was being removed from her custody. My mother's face went through several expressions: shock, rage, disbelief. She said this was insane, that she'd done nothing wrong, that I was manipulating everyone with lies. Linda opened her folder and started reading. Documented refusal of overnight observation after first seizure, failure to administer prescribed medication, verbal statements minimizing and denying documented medical condition, interference with doctor-patient communication. Each item was dated and attributed to specific medical staff. My mother turned on me then. Her voice shook with fury. She said I'd ruined everything, that I was a liar and a manipulator just like my father, that she'd sacrificed everything to raise me alone, and this was how I repaid her, by getting her investigated and humiliated. Linda stood up and positioned herself between us. She told my mother that threatening a minor during a CPS intervention was being documented too, that she needed to leave the hospital now. Security would escort her out if necessary. My mother grabbed her purse and left without looking back. I watched her go through the bay curtain and felt that crack in my chest split wider, not into a full break. Not yet, but close. Linda sat back down and told me it was going to be okay, that I'd done the right thing, that I was safe now. I wanted to believe her. The foster home was 40 minutes away in a suburb I'd never been to before. Linda drove me there herself after Dr. Patel discharged me with a new medication dosage and instructions for the foster parents. The house was a 2-story colonial with a neat lawn and a minivan in the driveway. Linda knocked and a woman answered. She was in her 50s with short blonde hair and warm brown eyes. Her name was Patricia. She invited us in and showed me to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was clean and simple. Twin bed with a blue comforter, desk, dresser, window overlooking the backyard. Patricia told me her husband David was at work, but would be home for dinner. They had 2 other foster kids currently, a girl named Sienna who was 14 and a boy named Marcus who was 12. House rules were simple. Respect each other. Do your chores. Keep your grades up. No drugs or violence. She asked if I had any questions. I asked if I could call my girlfriend. Patricia said of course. She handed me her house phone since my mother had kept mine. I dialed Maya's number from memory. She answered sounding worried. I told her what had happened. About CPS, about foster care, about my mother being investigated. Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she said her mom wanted to talk to me. Mrs. Reeves came on the line and her voice was thick with emotion. She said she was so sorry I'd been going through this alone, that she'd had no idea things were that bad, that Maya had told her everything after my 2nd seizure. She asked if I needed anything, clothes, school supplies, someone to talk to. I said I was okay for now, but thank you. She made me promise to call anytime. I hung up feeling less alone than I had in months. School became complicated. The district required documentation of my living situation change. I had to meet with the guidance counselor and explain why my emergency contact had changed from my mother to Patricia. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, everyone knew I was in foster care. Some kids were sympathetic, others were curious in that cruel way teenagers can be. A few asked invasive questions I didn't answer. Derek and Maya became my buffer. They sat with me at lunch and walked with me between classes and made it clear that anyone who wanted to gossip about me would have to go through them first. Maya held my hand in the hallways, even though public displays of affection technically weren't allowed. Nobody said anything. Even the strictest teachers looked the other way. The investigation moved slowly. Linda came to check on me weekly, asked about school, about my medication, about how things were at Patricia's house. I told her everything was fine, which was mostly true. Patricia and David were kind, but distant in the way foster parents learn to be. They provided structure and safety, but didn't try to replace my mother. Sienna was quiet and kept to herself. Marcus was loud and always making jokes. We existed in the house like planets in separate orbits, polite, functional. Not quite a family, but not hostile either. I went to school, did my homework, took my medication, saw Dr. Okafor for my follow-up. He said my EEG showed improvement with the new dosage. No seizures in 6 weeks. He asked how I was doing emotionally. I lied and said fine. The truth was I felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me feel things. I wasn't sad exactly, wasn't angry, just empty. Maya noticed. She asked me one afternoon while we were sitting in her car in the school parking lot if I was okay. Really, okay. I told her I didn't know how to answer that question anymore. She turned off the engine and shifted in her seat to face me fully. She said I didn't have to be okay, that it was normal to be not okay after what I'd been through, that pretending to be fine wasn't required. Something about the permission in her words made my throat tight. I told her I felt like I was floating, like nothing was real, like I was watching my life happen to someone else from a distance. She reached over and took my hand. She said that was probably shock, that trauma did that I should maybe talk to someone professional. Patricia helped me set up counseling through the foster care system. The therapist's name was Dr. Yosef. He was Ethiopian, mid-40s, with a quiet presence that made the room feel safe. His office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs and boxes of tissues on every surface. He asked me to tell him my story. I started with the first seizure, and he stopped me. He said, "Start further back." So I did. I told him about growing up with a mother who treated every need like a burden, about the broken wrist she ignored, about the migraines she said were fake, about being made to feel like existing was an imposition, about the constant message that I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy. Dr. Yosef listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said that what I described was emotional neglect, that it was real and valid and had nothing to do with me being dramatic or sensitive. He explained that children need emotional attunement from their caregivers. They need their feelings validated and their pain taken seriously. When that doesn't happen consistently, it creates attachment wounds that affect how you see yourself and the world. He said, my mother's response to my seizures wasn't about the seizures at all. It was a pattern that had been there my whole life. The seizures just made it visible to other people in a way that couldn't be denied or minimized. He asked if I'd ever thought about what I'd need to heal from this. I told him I didn't know where to start. He said we'd figure it out together, week by week, session by session. That healing wasn't linear, but it was possible. I left his office feeling like maybe I wasn't as broken as I'd thought, just cracked. And cracks could be repaired with time and the right care. The court date arrived 3 months after I'd been placed with Patricia. My mother had contested the CPS findings and was demanding my return to her custody. Linda had warned me this would happen. That family court prioritized reunification when possible. That judges were reluctant to permanently terminate parental rights unless there was severe abuse. Medical neglect lived in a gray area. It was serious, but not always enough for permanent removal. I had to testify. Linda prepared me beforehand, told me to stick to facts, not to get emotional or argumentative. Just answer the questions truthfully and let the documentation speak for itself. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, uncomfortable chairs. My mother sat at a table with her lawyer. She was wearing a professional dress and had her hair pulled back. She looked like a concerned parent instead of someone whose neglect had been documented by multiple medical professionals. The judge was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and a tired expression. She reviewed the case file while we all sat in silence. Then she asked the CPS lawyer to present their evidence. Linda stood up and walked through everything. The ER visits, the treatment refusal, the medication my mother had picked up but not given me, the second seizure that happened despite my compliance with treatment, the documented statements from medical staff about my mother's behavior. Dr. Patel had submitted a written statement. So had Dr. Okafor. Both described patterns of dismissal and minimization that had endangered my health. The judge took notes. Asked clarifying questions. Then she asked to hear from my mother's side. My mother's lawyer stood up. She painted a picture of a devoted single mother struggling to raise a difficult teenager. She said my mother had been overwhelmed and frightened by my first seizure, that her initial reaction had been shock and denial, which was understandable, that she'd since attended parenting classes and therapy, that she recognized her mistakes and wanted the chance to do better. She said taking me away had been an overreaction to an isolated incident, that families should be kept together when possible, that I belonged with my mother. The lawyer called my mother to testify. She walked to the witness stand looking small and vulnerable. She cried when describing how much she missed me, said she'd made mistakes but loved me, that she'd do anything to have me back. I watched this performance from my seat next to Linda and felt nothing, just that same hollow emptiness. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The judge asked me to describe what happened. I told her about the first seizure, about waking up in the ER to my mother calling me dramatic, about her refusing overnight observation, about finding my medication on the counter the next morning, about her telling Dr. Okafor that I had a stable home when I didn't, about the second seizure proving I'd been telling the truth all along. The judge asked if I wanted to return to my mother's custody. I said no. She asked why. I looked at my mother sitting at her table. Her lawyer had told her to look sad and concerned. She was doing it perfectly. I told the judge that my mother didn't see me as a person with real needs, that she saw me as an extension of herself, whose problems reflected badly on her, that I couldn't trust her to take care of me when I was sick or vulnerable, that I'd rather stay in foster care than go back to feeling like a burden in my own home. My mother's lawyer objected, said I was being coached or influenced by CPS. The judge asked if that was true. Linda stood up and said absolutely not. that I'd been in therapy and had space to process my experiences without pressure, that my testimony was consistent with months of documented observations. The judge asked me directly if anyone had told me what to say. I said no, that these were my own words describing my own life. The judge made more notes. Then she said she'd review everything and issue a ruling within 30 days. Court was adjourned. My mother tried to approach me on the way out, but Linda blocked her path. She told her there was a no-contact order in place during the investigation, that any communication had to go through lawyers. My mother's eyes met mine over Linda's shoulder. For just a second, the mask dropped, and I saw something raw underneath. Not love, not concern. Rage. Pure rage at me for exposing her. The ruling came 4 weeks later. The judge had decided to keep me in foster care for an additional 6 months with reunification therapy required before any custody changes. My mother would have supervised visitation once a month if I agreed to it. She'd have to complete parenting classes and continue her own therapy. The court would review the case again in 6 months to determine if reunification was appropriate. Linda called to tell me the news, asked how I felt about it. I said relieved. She said that was valid, asked if I wanted to participate in the supervised visits with my mother. I said I'd think about it. I didn't know if I had the capacity to sit in a room with her and pretend we could repair something that had maybe never existed in the first place. Maya graduated that spring. I watched her walk across the stage in her cap and gown and felt proud and sad at the same time. Proud because she'd worked so hard. Sad because she was leaving for college in the fall, and I'd still be here finishing my senior year. She'd gotten into a good school 3 hours away, far enough to feel like independence, but close enough to visit. We'd talked about trying to make long-distance work, about video calls and weekend visits. But sitting at her graduation party in her parents' backyard, watching her laugh with friends and pose for pictures, I felt the inevitable end approaching. Not because we didn't care about each other, but because she was moving forward into her future, and I was still stuck trying to survive my present. She found me later sitting alone by the fence, sat down next to me in her graduation dress, and leaned her head on my shoulder. She asked what I was thinking about. I told her the truth, that I was happy for her but scared to lose her, that she'd been my anchor through everything with my mother and CPS and foster care, that I didn't know how to do this without her. She took my hand and squeezed it. She said I was stronger than I thought, that I'd survived things that would have broken other people, that she wasn't going anywhere permanently, just to school, that we'd figure it out. But there was something in her voice, a hesitation, a sadness. We both knew it, even if we didn't say it. Sometimes love isn't enough when your lives are pulling you in different directions. Sometimes caring about someone means letting them go even when it hurts. We sat there by the fence until the sun went down and her mother called everyone inside for cake. I kissed her in the shadows and tried to memorize how it felt, just in case. Summer came and went. I got a job working at a grocery store to save money. Lived at Patricia's house. Went to therapy every week, took my medication, didn't have any seizures. Saw Maya twice before she left for college. Both times felt forced and awkward in a way they never had before. We were already growing apart, creating distance to make the inevitable split easier. She texted me on her first day of classes with pictures of her dorm room. I responded with congratulations and a heart emoji. 3 weeks later, she called. Said we needed to talk. I already knew what was coming. She said long distance was harder than she'd thought, that she needed to focus on adjusting to college, that she cared about me but couldn't give me what I needed right now. I told her I understood, meant it. We said we'd stay friends. Both knew that probably wouldn't happen but said it anyway because it made the ending feel less final. Senior year started and I threw myself into it. Applied to colleges, wrote scholarship essays, worked on weekends, spent evenings doing homework at Patricia's kitchen table while she cooked dinner and David watched the news. Sienna had been reunified with her mother. A new foster kid had moved in, a girl named Jasmine who was 15 and didn't talk much. I understood that. Sometimes silence was safer than words. I'd learned that lesson well. Dr. Yosef and I worked through my trauma in weekly sessions. He taught me coping strategies for anxiety, helped me identify negative thought patterns my mother had programmed into me, challenged me to imagine what I wanted my life to look like instead of just surviving what it had been. I started to realize I'd never let myself want things before. Never let myself dream or plan because hope felt dangerous when disappointment was guaranteed. But now, in foster care with distance from my mother, I could start to see possibilities. The 6-month review hearing happened in November. Same courtroom, same judge, different energy. My mother's lawyer presented evidence of her completion of parenting classes and therapy. Letters from her therapist saying she'd made progress. Records of her consistent attendance at supervised visitation. I'd gone to exactly 3 of those visits. They'd been stiff and performative. My mother asking surface questions about school. Me giving surface answers. Both of us performing for the social worker in the corner taking notes. No real conversation. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just 2 strangers going through required motions. The judge asked if I wanted to return to my mother's custody. I said no. She asked if I'd be willing to try unsupervised visits. I said no. She asked what I wanted. I said to stay in foster care until I turned 18. Then to go to college and build my own life. My mother's lawyer argued that I was being stubborn and influenced by anger, that I needed my mother, that family bonds were important. Linda presented counter-evidence, my therapy records showing significant improvement in foster care, my grades, which had gone from C's to A's, my medical records showing no seizures in almost a year, statements from Patricia and David about my progress, a letter from Dr. Okafor supporting my continued stable housing situation. The judge reviewed everything in silence. Then, she made her ruling. Custody would remain with the state through foster care until my 18th birthday. My mother would retain the right to supervised visitation, but it would not be mandatory for me to participate. The case would be closed after I turned 18 with no further review. I was essentially emancipated. Free. My mother stood up so fast, her chair fell backward. She screamed that this was unjust, that I'd poisoned everyone against her, that she'd done nothing to deserve this. The bailiff approached her. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm and pulled her back down. The judge warned her that outbursts would result in contempt charges. My mother sat there shaking with rage while I walked out of the courtroom with Linda. Outside, Linda asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know. Felt like I should be happy or relieved, but mostly just felt tired. She said that was normal. That closure often felt more like exhaustion than celebration. She told me she was proud of me, that I'd advocated for myself when it mattered most, that I'd broken a cycle. I thanked her for believing me when nobody else did, for seeing what was happening and doing something about it. She hugged me, said it was her job but that she'd remember my case, that sometimes she saw kids slip through the cracks and it haunted her, that I'd been one of the ones she'd been able to help, and that mattered. We stood in the courthouse parking lot while November wind whipped leaves around our feet. Then I got in Patricia's car and went back to the foster home that had become more of a home than my mother's house ever was. College acceptance letters started arriving in March. I got into 3 schools with decent financial aid packages. Chose the one closest to Patricia's house because David had offered to let me stay with them during breaks until I got on my feet. They'd become something like family over the past year and a half. Not replacements for what I'd lost, but new anchors. Patricia taught me how to do laundry properly. David helped me learn to change oil in a car. They came to my therapy appointments when I needed support. Celebrated when I got my driver's license. Helped me pick out a laptop for college. Small kindnesses that added up to something bigger. Proof that care didn't have to come with conditions. That support didn't have to feel like obligation. That people could show up for you without making you feel like a burden. These were revolutionary concepts for someone raised by my mother. Graduation came in June. I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, and Patricia and David stood up and cheered. Linda was there too. So was Dr. Yosef. My mother wasn't. I'd thought about inviting her. Dr. Yosef and I had processed it in therapy. He'd said it was my choice and there was no wrong answer. That I could invite her if I wanted closure or connection. That I could not invite her if I needed boundary protection. I decided not to. Some wounds needed distance to heal. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged no matter how much therapy and good intentions you threw at them. My mother had sent a card to Patricia's house. I'd opened it to find a generic congratulations message and a check for $50. No personal note. No acknowledgement of the past 2 years. Just money and a signature. I'd torn up the check and thrown the card away. Hadn't felt guilt about it either. Just acceptance that we'd never have what other people had with their mothers. That I'd survived her instead of being nurtured by her. Summer before college was peaceful. I worked full-time at the grocery store and saved every paycheck. Patricia helped me shop for dorm supplies. David helped me move in on a hot August morning. My roommate was a kid from California named Justin, who played guitar and wanted to study engineering. We got along fine. Not best friends, but compatible. I settled into college life easier than I'd expected. Classes were interesting. Freedom was intoxicating. I could go to bed when I wanted, eat what I wanted, take care of myself without someone telling me I was being dramatic or needy. I found a support group for students with chronic illness, met other people with epilepsy who understood the fear of having seizures in public, shared medication strategies and trigger management, built a community of people who got it without me having to explain. I didn't talk to my mother for 2 years. No calls, no visits, no contact. I'd blocked her number and social media. Linda had closed my CPS case on my 18th birthday. I was legally an adult, free to make my own choices about relationships and boundaries. Dr. Yosef helped me process the complicated grief of losing a parent who was still alive, the mourning of a relationship that had never been what I'd needed it to be, the anger at wasted years and unnecessary suffering, the slow acceptance that some people aren't capable of change no matter how many chances you give them. He helped me understand that protecting myself wasn't the same as being cruel, that I didn't owe my mother access to my life just because she'd given birth to me. That family was about behavior, not biology. The call came during my sophomore year. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my mother. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Older. She said she'd gotten my number from Patricia. Asked if we could talk. I considered hanging up. Considered telling her to leave me alone. Instead, I asked what she wanted. She said she'd been in therapy for real this time. Not court-mandated, but voluntary. Working through her own trauma and patterns. She said she'd finally started to understand what she'd done to me. that she'd been repeating cycles from her own childhood, that she was sorry. The word hung between us. Sorry. Like it could undo years of being made to feel worthless. Like it could erase the medical neglect and the court battles and the foster care. Like it could make me forget watching her tell doctors I was faking while I was unconscious on the floor. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't ready to have a relationship with her. That maybe I never would be. That she'd have to accept that and respect my boundaries. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she understood. That she'd keep working on herself, regardless. That if I ever changed my mind, she'd be there. That she'd let me control the pace and terms of any contact. I said maybe someday. Didn't promise anything. We hung up. I sat in my dorm room staring at my phone, feeling nothing and everything at once. Relief, anger, sadness, exhaustion. Dr. Yosef would have called it progress. The ability to hear her apology without immediately accepting it or forgiving her. The strength to maintain boundaries even when guilt tried to creep in. The understanding that reconciliation wasn't required for me to move forward with my life. 3 years later, I graduated college with a degree in psychology. Patricia and David came to the ceremony. So did Linda. So did Derek, who'd stayed my friend through everything. I'd found my people, built my chosen family, created a life that felt safe and stable and mine. I'd been seizure-free for 4 years, thanks to medication and stress management and therapy. I'd learned to advocate for myself with doctors and professors, and anyone who needed to understand my needs. I'd learned that having needs wasn't weakness, that asking for help wasn't manipulation, that taking care of yourself wasn't selfish. These were lessons my mother never taught me, that I'd had to learn from strangers who became family, from doctors who saw past her lies, from a system that, for once, worked the way it was supposed to. I see my mother once a year now. Coffee in a public place. Surface conversation. No deep processing or emotional reconciliation. Just two people who share biology sitting across from each other being civil. She's different, softer, more self-aware. She asks about my life without making it about her. Listens without dismissing. It's not the relationship I needed as a child, but it's what we have as adults. Dr. Yosef says that's enough, that I don't have to give her more than I'm comfortable with. That healing doesn't require forgiveness, just acceptance. I've accepted that my mother did her best with broken tools, that her best wasn't good enough, that I survived anyway and built something better, that I broke the cycle she couldn't break herself, that my future children, if I have them, will never doubt whether their needs matter. They'll never be called dramatic for being sick or hurt. They'll never be told they're faking when they're unconscious on the floor. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.